There's a persistent belief that survival during the Second World War was determined primarily by strategy, armor, and industrial output. Winter is often treated as a dramatic backdrop that punished armies indiscriminately. Yet, winter was not simply a setting. It was an operational force that shaped outcomes at the smallest human level. On the frozen fronts of Europe, survival often depended not on grand offensives but on minor, controlled sources of heat, no larger than a ration tin. Among the most overlooked of these tools was the improvised heat candle. Constructed from paraffin, animal fat, grease, or salvaged fuel packed into small metal containers, these devices provided slow, steady warmth inside dugouts, cellars, and shattered buildings. They did not win battles. They prevented frostbite, preserved dexterity, and extended endurance by crucial hours. In prolonged winter warfare, that margin meant survival. Winter functioned as a physiological enemy long before it became a strategic one. When Operation Barbarossa began in June 1941, German planners anticipated a rapid collapse of Soviet resistance. Winter clothing and heating equipment were not stockpiled in sufficient quantity because, well, a prolonged campaign was not expected. By the time temperatures plunged late that year, logistical networks were overstretched and units were exposed. The immediate crisis was mechanical. Engines froze, lubricants thickened, and artillery systems malfunctioned. But the deeper damage was physiological. Frostbite cases mounted rapidly. Soldiers lost sensation in fingers and toes. Rifles could not be handled properly. Men struggled to fasten equipment or load ammunition with numbed hands. Cold impairs cognition and reaction time. Units weakened not only through enemy fire, but through the steady attrition of environmental injury. A platoon diminished by frostbite casualties was operationally compromised, regardless of how many rifles remained. In this context, small-scale heating solutions became decisive. A confined source of warmth inside a foxhole or bunker could raise ambient temperature just enough to prevent exposed skin from freezing overnight. It could dry damp gloves. It could keep water from turning solid. These were not comforts, they were functional necessities. The heat candle was simple technology applied with discipline. The design was straightforward. A metal tin, often an empty ration container, was filled with wax, animal fat, or thickened fuel. A wick made of cloth or tightly rolled cardboard was embedded in the center. Once ignited, the device burned slowly for hours. German troops improvised such devices in forward positions. Soviet soldiers crafted comparable versions from scavenged materials. Resistance fighters and civilians adopted similar methods wherever fuel was scarce. The principle was consistent across fronts: controlled combustion in a contained space. Open fires were often impossible. Smoke revealed positions to artillery observers. Wood was limited in steppe regions and heavily contested in urban ruins. A small candle flame shielded within a container produced minimal visible signature and consumed limited fuel. Inside a reinforced dugout or cellar, even a few degrees of increased warmth could prevent early frostbite from becoming permanent injury. Soldiers could warm hands briefly before dawn. Boots stiffened by ice could be softened enough to put on without tearing seams. Such incremental advantages accumulated. Urban battles really magnified the importance of microheat. The brutal conditions during the Battle of Stalingrad, they illustrate just how much environmental survival shaped combat effectiveness. Soldiers occupied bombed structures that were stripped of insulation. Windows were shattered and roofs were collapsed. Snow entered interior spaces freely. Large fires were dangerous. Smoke columns attracted enemy fire, and fuel supplies were unreliable at best. In this setting, small, shielded heat sources allowed troops to survive inside partially destroyed buildings without broadcasting their location. Medical reports from winter campaigns, they consistently document frostbite as a major cause of non-combat loss. Divisions degraded not just from casualties inflicted by opposing forces, but from cold injuries that rendered soldiers unfit for duty. Units that managed shelter construction carefully and used small heating devices saw comparatively fewer severe cases. This did not eliminate suffering. Conditions remained extreme. But, disciplined heat management reduced operational collapse. Winter warfare became as much about insulation, ventilation, and fuel conservation as it was about maneuver. Civilian survival under siege really depended on the same principle. The importance of contained heat extended well beyond military formations. During the siege of Leningrad, centralized heating systems failed or were destroyed, and fuel allocations were minimal. The winter of 1941–42 was especially severe. Residents sealed off single rooms within apartments to conserve warmth. Improvised paraffin lamps and fat-based candles were used to heat small enclosed spaces, just enough to prevent lethal freezing. These devices also allowed for limited cooking and water thawing. Survival depended on preserving body heat overnight and minimizing exposure. Similar patterns emerged in heavily damaged cities such as Warsaw and Berlin. Bombing raids disrupted coal distribution and destroyed infrastructure. Civilians scavenged debris for fuel. Large fires were inefficient and dangerous in confined ruins. Small heat sources offered a more controlled alternative. Diaries and post-war testimonies repeatedly reference nights endured because a modest flame kept a room marginally above freezing. The scale of these devices made them unremarkable in official documentation, yet their cumulative impact was substantial. Military doctrine absorbed these lessons quietly after the war. Post-war analysis of winter campaigns emphasized logistical and environmental preparation. The failures of early German winter planning were studied closely by other militaries. Cold weather gear, portable heating systems, and insulated shelter construction became formal components of training. The United States Army's approach to cold weather operations during the Korean War reflected lessons drawn from earlier European campaigns. While technology advanced, the principle remained consistent. Small, reliable heat sources preserved human capability in extreme conditions. Modern survival kits often include compact fuel tablets, chemical warmers, or portable stoves designed to provide localized heat without significant smoke signature. The lineage of these tools can be traced conceptually to improvised devices used during the Second World War. Microheat sustains macro effectiveness. Warmth had psychological as well as physical value. Cold, degrades morale gradually. Continuous exposure reduces concentration and erodes willpower. In prolonged campaigns, mental fatigue just compounded physical vulnerability. A small heat candle glowing inside a bunker provided more than just a temperature increase. It signified control. In environments dominated by artillery barrages and unpredictable assaults, the ability to generate warmth really represented a form of agency. Survival psychology emphasizes the stabilizing effect of manageable tasks and controllable variables. Lighting and maintaining a contained heat source created routine. Routine supported resilience, and resilience in turn sustained cohesion. Accounts from veterans on multiple fronts note the relief associated with even minimal warmth. It allowed brief restoration of circulation and focus. The cumulative effect over weeks of exposure was, honestly, significant. Scarcity encouraged innovation at the lowest levels of command. The Second World War was industrial in scale, yet winter survival often depended on local improvisation. When supply chains faltered, units adapted using available materials. Wax from damaged equipment, grease from machinery, cardboard from ammunition packaging, and scrap metal containers were repurposed. This adaptability was not confined to one army. German, Soviet, Allied, and resistance forces all demonstrated similar ingenuity under constraint. Units that fostered practical knowledge sharing and encouraged initiative reduced non-combat losses. After 1945, militaries increasingly recognized the importance of decentralized problem-solving in extreme environments. Training programs emphasized fieldcraft, insulation methods, and efficient fuel usage. The modest heat candle represented a broader lesson. Small, repeatable solutions matter. Environmental survival shaped operational endurance. Grand narratives of the Second World War focus on ideological conflict, armored thrusts, and decisive offensives. Those elements were crucial. Yet the ability of individuals to remain functional through winter nights influenced operational tempo. A soldier who preserved finger mobility could operate a weapon effectively at dawn. A civilian who survived a freezing night could endure ration lines the following day. Thousands of such incremental survivals accumulated into sustained resistance or continued occupation. Cold functioned as a persistent adversary. Defeating it required attention to details often excluded from campaign summaries. Insulation, ventilation, moisture control, and small-scale heat generation were as relevant to endurance as ammunition supply. Remembering these small technologies keeps the historical record balanced. The tiny survival heat candle did not alter strategic decisions or redraw front lines. It did not determine outcomes in campaigns such as Operation Barbarossa or the Battle of Stalingrad. Yet it contributed quietly to the survival of thousands who endured those events. Understanding this reframes how winter warfare is interpreted. Large-scale operations are built upon the physical capacity of individuals. That capacity is sustained through mundane, practical measures that rarely appear in official communiques. Studying these overlooked tools adds texture to the history of the Second World War. It highlights adaptation, resilience, and the interplay between environment and human decision-making. It also reinforces a broader lesson about preparedness. Survival often depends less on dramatic equipment and more on disciplined application of simple principles. If this deeper examination of winter survival during the Second World War has expanded your understanding, consider subscribing to Hidden in History. And if you value careful, in-depth historical analysis that brings overlooked details into focus, share this video. The quieter elements of history deserve sustained attention.